The straw hat that Luffy has, and the one that has been passed down through generations, is actually a replica in honor of Joy Boy, and this is actually the original straw hat. Hello my fellow wannabe straw hats, and welcome back to the One Piece saga, where today we have an arc that I don't even have the words to describe. With us already moving into the Emperor's part of the story, I did expect some big reveals, but this, well, everything was big, including an ambiguous straw hat. So with that said, let us not waste any more time and dive right into Reverie. Before we even get to the story itself, let us address the elephant in the room. This arc is like 60% flashbacks and the pacing of it is extremely jarring. That said, I do admit seeing a bunch of the most signature moments reanimated was cool, even if I've seen many of them at least like 20 times by now. And on top of that, I think this is the first time I'm actually seeing the whole Luffy stabbing his eye scene that all of you told me about way back in Romance Dawn. It does make me wonder what changed regarding censorship guidelines for it to suddenly just be fine, but fair enough I suppose. Though yeah, because of this entire recap-y nonsense, just like with Dressrosa, I'll offer up two different rankings. One taking the pacing into account, and the other is purely based on story. So, that said, let us get properly stuck in. The very first thing we see is a check-in with the crew right after the events of Whole Cake Island. First off, we see that Zeus is actually tagging along properly. So that is certainly a huge level up for Nami. But at the same time, I do admit, I find the whole part of Big Mom's soul infusion just a tad weird. Especially because she can seemingly infuse it into absolutely whatever, but can't take it back. Just seems like a weird limitation for that power, but whatever, the Nami-Zeus dynamic ought to be fun, so I'm looking forward to all the not-so-friendly interactions between the two. Though secondly, and this is one that I am far less happy about, is that we see Sanji's raid suit drop out of Luffy's hat. In case you don't remember what I said about it in Whole Cake Island, these are the most stupid and goofy looking things I've ever seen, so I seriously did not want Sanji to get it, but alas, here it is. Obviously Sanji does say that he wouldn't use it, but I wasn't born yesterday. If he were to never use it, it wouldn't have even showed up here and that would be the end of that, but no. So yeah, considering Sanji's designs are usually dripped out suits, I can already warn you about an impending rant when he inevitably activates it and turns into some weird budget Power Ranger edgelord. And I also think that the whole power-up in a literal can thing is also a bit meh. That said, I don't want to jump to conclusions, so I guess only time will tell. Another huge deal is of course our very own captain. But before we get to him, we get a super short check-in with Makino, who too now has a child of her own, or what at least looks to be a child of her own. With this being Oda, obviously it has to have some deeper significance, and if I had to make a guess, I would say that this is the child of Shanks, so I'm expecting to see another red hair pirate running around very soon. Jokes aside, Makino is such a wholesome character that I just wish she'd meet Luffy face to face again sometime. I'm like 99% certain that, just like with Shanks, it won't happen until the very end of the series, but hey, a man can dream. And speaking of Shanks, it's also here where the big news is broken. Luffy is now referred to as the 5th Emperor. And who do we see react to the news? Of course, none other than our boy Shanks. I do admit, at this point I was ready to jump up in anticipation because Shanks is coming back into the story, but of course, he is once again just chilling and not really doing anything. I do think that he'll play into what we see either with the fallout of the Reverie or Wano in some manner, but as of now, we wouldn't really get to see him do basically anything at all. But that said, with Luffy now being the 5th Emperor of the Sea, I'm curious to see how that affects everything from this point onward. Obviously, we knew that Luffy and the Straw Hats were infamous as is, but getting the title of an emperor, I'm guessing that alone is enough to send ripples throughout the world. So maybe we'll now see someone deliberately target Luffy instead of us going after someone else? Who knows? Oh, and also, the fact that Luffy misread his bounty was a joke I saw coming a mile away, but I won't lie, it still had me seriously cracking up. But just like me, there are plenty more people who are fans of the old Straw Boy. And I'll say it right now, seeing literally everyone we've met so far just share their stories and essentially just fangirl about Luffy was the most wholesome thing ever. I've been joking around how Luffy is very conveniently going around the world and assembling allies in royalty, but seeing all of them in one place, or might I say one piece, was a really good reminder of just how much backing our little group of misfits actually has. Oh, and Leo in his little pirate uniform looks absolutely awesome. We then cut to a completely new location where we see Peachbeard, a creatively named subordinate of Blackbeard, taking over some town. But of course, we then see the Revolutionaries show up, which was basically just a series of major flexes. But one thing that had me scratching my head was this dude, because my first reaction was like, wait, hold on, does he have Pika's fruits? The whole molding earth around him looked incredibly similar, but as far as we know, I don't think Pika is dead. But then I remembered Impel Down, and is this the dude who dug out Eva's party room? Definitely fits the bill if you ask me. Fruit power checks out, revolutionary status checks out, time frame also makes sense, so maybe? And the other thing that I absolutely have to mention is the murder of Crows dude. No joke, this is easily one of my favorite fruit powers to date, and I cannot wait to see it in action. Just how menacing it is approaching from a distance is incredible. Though to be fair, I'm a sucker for the usual crow symbolism trope, so that might just be my bias showing. But we then learn the reason why all of these big names are gathered up here. The Revolutionaries are officially declaring war on the Celestial Dragons. And oh boy, as I'm recording this, news has just broken that Oda is planning the final saga, and this very much looks like the steps for the final saga. Obviously, we'd see exactly what this means in a second, but needless to say, this is not a small proclamation. I might have been wrong about Dragon making his big move in Marineford, but the next time Luffy's baited out by a captured friend, I guarantee it, the Revolutionary Army will make their huge move. Heard it here first, don't at me. Though speaking of big declarations, we finally get a follow-up with Fujitora. And here, we essentially hear that the abolishment of the 7 Warlords is actually going through, and that Vegapunk has already completed the replacement for the Warlords. I'll be honest with you, I haven't got the foggiest of what exactly that might be, especially considering the entire Kuma discussion we already had, and how Vegapunk might too just turn out to be a revolutionary. If I had to make a wild guess, maybe the replacements are just the old pacifistas equipped with gear akin to Germa's tech? Considering Luffy one-shot the vanilla pacifista, giving them a slight upgrade might tip the scales back in their favor. And on top of that, it would also remove the human factor outright, which is of course what complicated the entire Kuma situation in the first place. Aside from that, no clue, and I guess only time will tell. Unless... what if the replacement for the Warlords are objects that are infused with devil fruits? Perhaps even multiple, Returning to the crew, we get a bit of a whimsical scene of Luffy casually telling everyone about his family, which, not surprisingly, leaves many of them absolutely stunned. I mean, he had a brother who was a legendary Whitebeard pirate and the son of the Pirate King. He has another brother, which is now the second in command for the Revolutionary Army. His own father is the commander of the Revolutionaries, and his grandfather is a legendary Marine. So yeah, his family tree is very much stacked. But as with every time Luffy suddenly brings something up, this now makes me wonder what else he just hasn't mentioned. Is he just going to pipe up one day saying, yeah, so I once had this dream that the red line shattered, it might have been a vision of the future, but who knows? Or something completely wild like that. Or actually better yet, maybe he'll reveal that the straw hat he's wearing right now isn't actually Shanks's because he lost it. Instead, he just picked up a new one at the nearest dollar store. Jokes aside, the fact that we are nearing episode 900 and we still don't know who Luffy's mother is nuts, and at this point, I am convinced that it has to be an absolutely ginormous reveal somewhere down the line. Returning to the Reverie and everything going on there, we see Shirahoshi very much embody that Straw Hat energy as she too has overcome her fears and is actually attending the Reverie herself. And that scene of her just being amazed by the sun and saying, "What a beautiful world," was a really touching scene, and marked the beginning of what would become a major throughline in this arc. I just absolutely want to see all of these characters meet back up with Luffy, but alas, I would not get any of that. We also get a check-in with Stelly, who I had honestly forgot even existed, but the fact that he is indeed brought back seriously makes me raise an eyebrow. It is entirely possible that he is being brought back just to contrast Sabo, but at the same time, I can't help but think that there has to be more to it. Especially with a particularly ominous silhouette we'd see a tad later. But hold that thought for a second. Oh, and also, because we've seen all the stunning views of Marie Joie, we do of course need to be reminded of the horrors that actually make it possible. Which I think was a very nice juxtaposition to essentially just be like, yeah, don't forget, this place is messed up and needs to go down. Oh, and if you thought I'd already nerded out about seeing everyone meet back up, you've got another thing coming. Because seeing Vivi meet the Tontadas, then seeing Dalton and Kureha and all the other characters we've met through the literal hundreds of episodes, I seriously could not be happier. I've said this a lot before, but One Piece has one thing that very few, if any, series will ever have, and that is its massive scale. And even saying that, it still feels like I'm not doing it service. Simply because of the sheer amount of story that it is told, these sorts of reunions are simply impossible in most other series. So of course, again, I enjoyed literally every second of it. I did have my fingers crossed that through some shenanigans the Straw Hats would somehow end up meeting everyone here and now, but perhaps that was a silly wish considering how far from Marie Joie we currently are. Alright, I need to come clean. We've blitzed through so many things, mostly because I want to spend ample time talking about the many a revelation that come in this part of the story. And oh boy, are there many. And the first of many mysteries that absolutely broke my brain is us cutting to everyone's favorite glasses-wearing gentleman who's talking about some secrets. Only for us to then cut to this single silhouette walking through some underground sort of chamber with Luffy's wanted poster, and then opening a door to a massive straw hat. And because I had my raw reaction recorded, I'll just let that speak for itself.
That is a straw hat. What?
I mean, of course, as you'd expect, I obviously have about 500 million theories regarding this, but I'll only list off a couple that immediately popped into my mind. My first idea isn't really an idea and it's more so a thematic note, but it's just that the straw hat is juxtaposing the crown that Eam wears. So instead of some high and noble crown, it is but a simple straw hat, which may go to speak about some sort of original war way back when. Maybe some simple farmers wearing straw hats revolted against the world government or something along those lines. But yeah, it's basically just setting up that contrast. My other idea is actually somewhat connected to the first, and that is that the straw hats will actually end up being a sort of a true crown, and Luffy would be the one true king, who instead of ruling over people, would choose to free them. But of course, that's just Luffy's straw hat and doesn't explain absolutely anything about the big one we see here. Which brings me on to my third idea. Is there some sort of project to clone Luffy, and the key to cloning him is maybe a piece of memorabilia? Cloning is clearly possible, as we've already seen with Germa, but that then of course makes you ask, how do they even have a straw hat to begin with, and one that appears to have been kept for a long time? Which brings me on to idea numero 4. Was Joy Boy a giant, or maybe he had a giant friend with whom he had matching straw hats or something? Wait, hold on. We've already seen Oars' bloodline, right? So maybe sometime way back when Joy Boy was buddies with the first Oars and they had matching straw hats? Or wait, maybe idea numero 5, which I think actually makes the most sense. The straw hat that Luffy has, and the one that has been passed down through generations, is actually a replica in honor of Joy Boy, and this is actually the original straw hat. Keep in mind that Joy Boy never fulfilled his promises. So what if once Joy Boy died and the world government created the Void Century to cover all of that up, the secret of the Straw Hat was passed down in a replica as a tribute to Joy Boy, which would signify his unfulfilled promises. And now that it's in the hands of Luffy, he'd be the one to fulfill it. And my last theory is completely ridiculous and frankly makes zero sense, but what if this is some sort of adaptive devil fruit that's basically like, hey Eam, code red, look for this object, it will destroy you. And the reason why I say this is because so far, with all the big names we've seen, I honestly have a bit of a hard time believing how the world government has honestly stayed in power. So if they were to have this sort of alarm system in place that actually lets them stay a step ahead, maybe it would sway the balance in their favor? And then with Eam verifying that the Straw Hat is indeed identical on the wanted poster to what his alarm system is telling him, is just him verifying that Luffy is indeed bad news? Okay, yeah, I admit that literally makes no sense. Okay, and my last theory is even more ridiculous. But what if this is Uranus? Okay, yeah, I admit that literally makes no sense. Like, why would a Straw Hat have to do anything with the sky? Unless... what if Joy Boy comes from a sky island and is almost literally a god of the skies? And if his power was to somehow end up in a Straw Hat a la hockey-infused weapons, well then wouldn't that be interesting? Okay, this is just embarrassing. That literally makes zero sense. Let's just move on. Except let's not, because Doffy is still a part of this entire mystery, and we basically see none of him after this. Remember the whole immortality thing, right? Number 1, is Eam immortal? And number 2, why did Doffy want to be immortal? Is it just a case of, hey, I'm immortal now, deal with it? Or is it some sort of prerequisite for a further plan? Frankly, I've got no idea, but considering Oda told me that Gold Roger is actually Gold D Roger, I am willing to bet that Eam is actually Eam Mortal. Alright, now you can unwrap your tinfoil for a second because we get to see some good old noble dunking. Because we are at Marie Joie, obviously we'd meet someone who deserves to be punched right back into manga, and that is exactly what we see. We see the literal waste of space Charlos show back up, but before things get out of hand, it is none other than the world noble who was saved back on Fishman Island that punches Charlos. And like, what? First off, he's a Donkahite, meaning he is connected to Doffy? As I usually say, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't really care that they just so happen to be related. I mean, sure, why not, right? There are only so many royal families, why couldn't they share a last name? But this is Oda after all, so I'm betting we'll find out that this dude was actually Doffy's best friend growing up and that Doffy implanted a kill switch in him and he can manipulate him while being imprisoned and impelled down. Yeah, 100%. But jokes aside, I can't wait to see how Doffy is tied back into this and how these royal family links even come into play. I mean, who knows, maybe by the end of the story, Doffy will just embrace total anarchy and go against the world government alongside Luffy, a la Crocky and Marineford. But secondly, this is an absolute far cry from everything we've seen so far, because turning even a single celestial dragon is clearly a massive deal. And once again, by extension, Luffy now has a celestial dragon supporting him. So, you know, that is probably pretty useful. I'm calling it now, he'll be our inside agent once Luffy attacks Marie Joie. 100% guarantee it. And of course, CP0's here too, which honestly has me scratching my head big time. Let me get this straight. What you're telling me is that each and every one of them took massive L's back in Enies lobby as they were all beaten by the Straw Hats who were no more than rookies at the time, but instead of being erased from history, they got promoted to an even more powerful agency. Seems sorta backwards if you ask me, but fair enough I guess. Congratulations on the promotion. But now it is time to get serious, because everything we've talked about so far is small stuff compared to this. Shanks is meeting the 5 Elder Stars to talk about, quote-unquote, a certain pirate. Why, how, and what? How the is he even here? And why the is he being held in high regard by them? But anyway, as per usual, I have about 50 different ways of looking at this, each one crazier than the last. First off, perhaps the most intuitive, I think he might be here because he knows something about Blackbeard. Keep in mind that he went over to meet Whitebeard directly, trying to make sure that Ace doesn't go after him. And then once all of that failed, he showed up in Marineford himself to put an end to the war. At this point, more often than not, if Shanks is involved, Blackbeard is as well. So maybe that's exactly it. Shanks has come here to warn the world government about something that Blackbeard's about to do that might put a lot of people in danger. Just like we saw in Marineford. He might be a pirate himself, but he doesn't want pointless bloodshed. Blackbeard, on the other hand, really doesn't seem to care. So if that were the case, I think it makes sense. At the same time, Shanks himself is an absolute unit, so why would he bother contacting the Five Elders of all people? The only real reason I'd see is if Blackbeard has one of the ancient weapons or something along those lines, which would make even Shanks think twice about his next move. But who knows? My second line of thinking is actually the old glasses-wearing gentleman. Considering the whole secret treasury he has, and now the reveal of the Straw Hat that just so happens to be immediately after we see him in Impel Down, clearly Doffy too is up to something. Just like with Blackbeard, it's pretty clear that he couldn't care less about human life. So like I just said, it might just be Shanks trying to minimize losses in case he tries pulling something. And lastly, and I know this is heavy tinfoil, it might be Luffy. I'm sorry, but the fact that he casually shows up in the room of the Five Elder Stars and is actually held in high regard is sus to say the least. And because of a scene we'll get to in a second, there is a small fraction of my brain that's telling me that Shanks may not be as pure as we've thought so far. I obviously won't jump to the conclusion that all of this might have been a 500 IQ play to somehow manipulate Luffy to finding the One Piece or something, but still, this is very bizarre to say the least. And alright, obviously I lied, I do have another way of looking at it, which of course also involves Luffy. What if Shanks is here to warn them? What if his goal for being here is just to essentially tell them, the fifth emperor that just popped into the news? Yeah, you lay a finger on him, and your little reverie will have red hair pirates swarming. The timing here of him showing up right after Luffy's put in the spotlight does seem very handy. And if I had to make a bet on what this meeting actually was, I would put my money on it either being Blackbeard or this protecting Luffy move. But again, there's another scene a tad later which I want to talk about, so hold that thought for now. And because this is a lore dump arc, obviously things do not end there. Because as we follow up with Sabo, he runs into none other than Kuma. And sheesh, the tension in this entire sequence was something else entirely. For a second, I genuinely thought that everything would go wrong then and there, and we'd just jump right into a all-out confrontation. But that would have obviously been ridiculous considering how few of them actually are here, and so they do keep Sabo under control. But one thing that I've seriously begun thinking that I don't think I've mentioned yet is the role of Sabo in the bigger story. I genuinely feel like in many ways he has just replaced Ace outright, and with everything that has happened since his introduction, it just makes that thought so much more pronounced. Let me explain what I mean. Ace dies and Luffy loses a brother, right? Well, surprise, there was another brother all along. Oh, and Ace's super cool fire fruits? Yeah, well, Sabo's got that too now. Oh, and Ace was the second in command of an incredibly powerful pirate crew? Well, okay, Sabo's the second in command of an incredibly powerful revolutionary group. I know I'll get crucified for saying this, especially with Ace's tattoo and all that, but in many ways, I legit think that Oda killed off Ace, but realized that he still wants an older brother for Luffy, and so Sabo just became Ace 2.0, even down to his power. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't like him or something, but he just feels a little bland. And you know who this also applies to? Kuina, who also died, but all's well because she has a literal clone by the name of Tashigi. But okay, I won't open that can of worms now. That is better left for a One Piece retrospective of sorts somewhere down the line. Though, returning to the story, last thing I'll say here is that I just refuse to believe that this is the last time we'll be seeing Kuma. Maybe they can get his brain chip or something and extract some knowledge about Marie Joie or something along those lines, but there's got to be more to it. But with that, we get to another huge what is going on moment. We see the Five Elder Stars bow to Eam, and of course, the empty throne is revealed to not be so empty. Also, calling it now, Stelly will sit on the throne. The scene of him asking to sit on it is way too on the nose for it not to cause some confusion somewhere down the line. I guarantee it, someone will see Stelly sitting on the throne and it will be a big deal. Or maybe the 5 elders will take a report from him instead of him and not even realize. Something is going to happen with him sitting on it, I guarantee it. Heard it here first. Though, with that said, I've got a lot of mixed thoughts on Im already, as I think he, her, or they are introduced way too late into the story to take the spotlight from someone like Blackbeard, or even just the 5 elders. So far, whenever we got to see the 5 elders, it felt like they were always the ones pulling the strings. And that ambiguity of why there even is this little council and why is it exactly them was the primary mystery. But now we know that, nope, they are just the henchmen to an even bigger force. Which would be fine in and of itself, but this late into the story, it just feels a little weird. It's not like we even needed to escalate from the 5 elders, right? We still haven't really seen them properly in action. But of course, I won't jump to any judgments just yet, as we clearly know next to nothing about what's going on here. And yes, I already mentioned it, but obligatory immortality prediction. Could Im be immortal? Honestly, with this one, it does seem like 5 times more likely than with the 50 other times I've said this, but I suppose only time will tell. And we then get to this scene. We see Im chilling in their garden of sorts with wanted posters of numerous familiar faces. But then someone else enters the room. And I don't even care what they're doing here, but are they wearing a straw hat? I tweeted this out right after watching the episode and joking about the absurdity of this entire arc, but some of you told me that apparently this angle isn't even in the manga and is an anime add-in, so maybe I'm reading into this way too much, but I'm telling you, from the anime at least, that 100% looks like a straw hat. But anyway, we see that Im had 4 very specific people: Blackbeard, Shirahoshi, Luffy, and Vivi. And they hold onto Vivi's poster specifically, which now makes me ask, what's so special about her? The 3 others are of course pretty easy. Blackbeard and Luffy are already turning the world upside down, Shirahoshi is literally one of the ancient weapons, but what is up with Vivi? If I were to jump headfirst into my theory hole, the Egyptian Queen Nefertari had all kinds of titles, but one of them was the one for whom the sun shines. And you know, there's another thing associated with the skies that's a constant mystery. You know, something like Uranus. So could she turn out to be Uranus? It would definitely track, considering that's exactly how Shirahoshi's power works. And keep in mind that the whole rain thing was also a major deal in Alabasta. And while that was obviously affected by Crocky, I think you could easily tie it in with the skies in general being a through line in that part of the story. And then the whole "another light is to be extinguished" part is like the most ominous thing ever. Do I think Vivi or Shirahoshi will die? Absolutely not. But could they, or more precisely Vivi, become the instigator for the crew going after her? 100%. My original thought was always that Sabo would end up being captured, and we'd basically see an inversion of Marineford where Luffy would indeed be successful. But considering they're explicitly targeting Vivi, it might just turn out to be one of her own. Obviously, the world does not know that Vivi is a Straw Hat, but come on! Imagine the scene of Luffy just screaming out to not lay a finger on his crewmates. I need that. But with all that said, what even happens next? Big Mom and Kaido are apparently both explicitly going after Luffy, the revolutionaries have declared a proper war, and most of Luffy's allies just so happen to be concentrated in the same place. Basically, everything is going wrong, and something tells me we'll be changing course sometime very, very soon. Wano is obviously our prime target, but after that, something tells me Marie Joie might get some visitors very soon. This arc is absolutely nuts in how many things it sets up, and there are still so many I only flew over. Like, Bonnie was here too. Remember that we already had the whole "my blood ran cold when I heard you escape" scene with Akainu and her. So how is she here, what is she doing here, and like, what is going on with her in general? The worst generation does seem to be coming back into the story in full force, so I really want to find out what's her deal. If someone can shake Akainu and prompt such a response, there's got to be something very, very big there. But yes, with that is at least the gist of the Reverie. An arc that feels super weird in that I wouldn't even call it an arc per se. More so just a long list of plot points that set up 3 times as many mysteries. So what's the deal with Eam? What's the deal with Shanks and the 5 Elders? What's the deal with the big Straw Hat? Who knows? And that is Reverie. I'll say it right now, the ranking for this one is so wacky that I kind of feel like I'm doing it just for the sake of doing it. I think you know me by now, I absolutely love getting wrapped up in tinfoil and shooting out wild predictions about what all of this could mean, but at the same time, this is mostly just a bullet point of mysteries and reveals, so I don't really want to rank it particularly high just because of that. Story-wise, there really isn't much there. So with that said, without taking the pacing into account, Reverie will be taking a high B just because of how much fun I had with it. Is it still a little bit too high for so little content? Probably yes, but hey, it is my tier list, okay? Though if I were to take all the filler into account as well, oh boy, this would probably be a low C or even a D tier arc. Yeah, the pacing, I mean, you can't really even call it pacing, but it was just dreadful. Honestly, just makes me hope they go back to doing 100% filler arcs like we saw before so that the manga can actually get ahead to avoid situations like these. But with all that out of the way, for what will be one of the final times in the series, it is time for us to set sail for Wano. And that's the video. A surprisingly long one considering the length of the arc itself, but definitely a fun one before we enter the marathon that is Wano. And we'll also be finally catching up with present-day Koroto. All of that said, as usual, I want to give a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.